Anakin Skywalker's greatest crime was the slaughtering of defenseless Jedi children during Order 66. In Star Wars Legends, shortly after the fall of the Republic, Vader returned to the Temple and was forced to psychologically face his demons. Some have argued that Anakin killed the Younglings as a way to purposefully fully embrace the dark side of the Force and grow in power, perhaps not unlike how Kylo Ren killed his father at Starkiller Base.
The main reason Anakin killed the Younglings was to submerge himself into the dark side, killing off Anakin completely and being reborn as Darth Vader. Anakin wanted more pain to dive deeper into the dark side and pledge himself to Palpatine's teachings.
That's a good and interesting theory, but in my opinion, a wrong interpretation of the situation, and I think it mischaracterizes the fall of Anakin, who was manipulated into increasingly dark actions and emotionally broken, resulting in his actions as Darth Vader. Let me explain why, and we'll start with the basics. Anakin, as an individual, never had to fight for access to the dark side. Even as Vader, he wasn't forced to commit acts of terror to fuel his rage and further his descent. Rather, especially as a Jedi, his anger was unleashed by events. It was coaxed out of him, whether by the death of his mother or the manipulations of Palpatine. Like many in the real world, the darkness pulled at Anakin, and during moments or decades of weakness, guided his hand and influenced his actions. From the moment he first saw fear as a youngling standing before the Jedi Council, Anakin had to fight to keep his negative emotions inside, and this is actually the polar opposite of a Ben Solo, a man who struggles to fully commit to the dark side, to give into anger and hate and commit bad actions. But we'll talk about him a different day. The heart of Anakin's darkness is fear, which the Revenge of the Sith novelization describes as a dragon. At night, the Dead Star Dragon sometimes sneaks through the cracks and crawls up into his brain and chews at the inside of his skull. The dragon whispers of what Anakin has lost, what he will lose. It reminds him every night of how he held his dying mother in his arms, that someday he will lose Obi-Wan, he will lose Padme, or they will lose him. All things die, Anakin Skywalker, even stars burn out. And the only answer he ever has for these dead cold whispers are his memories of Obi-Wan's voice, or Yoda's, but sometimes he can't quite remember them. All things die, he can barely even think about it. The dragon, if not controlled by goodness and Jedi teachings, can be at least suppressed by rage and negative dark emotions. Another quote from the duel against Dooku: "The imaginary Dead Star Dragon tries its best to freeze away his strength, to whisper that Dooku has beaten him before." But Palpatine's words, "Rage is your weapon," have given Anakin permission to unseal the shielding around his furnace heart. Then later in the novel, it wasn't anger he was hiding. His anger was only camouflage. Behind his anger hid the dragon. Anakin never desired darkness. He wanted to remove fear, to become powerful enough to save those he loved from death, to protect Palpatine so he could learn the secrets the old man teased, to escape the chains that had bound him and caused him to fear the safety of his marriage. He wanted to live happily with Padme and his new child, free of enemy, secrecy, and rules. But that's obvious to everyone, and I know what you're thinking. That doesn't preclude the fact that Anakin may have killed the Younglings as a means to become more powerful so he could use the Force to save Padme. The point is, Anakin didn't need to act to let the dark side out. He had to fight to keep the fear and the dark side within. And in fact, he didn't kill the children to gain access to the dark side or more power. The dark side allowed him to kill the children. From Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader, he had wondered beforehand, could he do it? Still new to the dark side, would he be able to call on its power to guide his hand and lightsaber? In answer, the dark side had whispered, "They are orphans. They are without family or friends. There is nothing that can be done with them. They are better off dead." But this recalling, weeks later, curdled his blood. The place should never have been built. In fact, he hadn't killed the Jedi to serve Sidious, though Sidious was meant to believe just that. No, he hadn't killed the Jedi in service to Sidious, or for that matter, to demonstrate his allegiance to the Order of the Sith. He had executed Palpatine's command because the Jedi would never have understood Anakin's decision to sacrifice Mace and the rest in order that Padme might survive the tragic death she suffered in Anakin's visions. The children were killed for the same reason the rest of the Jedi were. Anakin began down a a dark path, and the dark side rationalized his actions. Another quote, "Even if he had killed Sidious, even if he had won the war single-handedly for the Republic, the Jedi would have fought him to the bitter end. They might have taken custody of his and Padme's child." So Anakin's fear caused him to act. Certainly not the first time we've seen that. But that still begs the question, did killing the younglings not make him more powerful? Maybe, but not because committing evil made him a more powerful Darksider, whatever that means. He basically destroys himself emotionally by the act, and loses the will and perhaps ability to control himself. He's manic when he sees Padme again, and then snaps on her in an instant because he's basically given his whole life away. He's lost the ability to even control himself. He feels pain over his regret and guilt, the death of his friends, and what feels like again the loss of his former life. Later, as Padme dies, this is all exaggerated, as now his evil acts were for nothing. Being powerful in the dark side is about losing inhibitions and giving in to negative emotions. So killing younglings theoretically could help with this, and is something some, like Kylo, would have to do. But in Anakin's case, it was actually an unintended consequence of a series of traumas driven by fear and Sheev's manipulations until he was a fully broken man. Another quote, "The recognition that he would probably never be able to set foot on Naboo or Tatooine tore an anguished moan from him that toppled the rest of the plinths as if they were dominoes, leaving their crowning Bronzian busts sliding across the floor. Hollowed by the mournful outpouring, he supported himself against a broken column for what seemed like an eternity." Unsurprisingly, you don't see Palpatine, the most powerful Darksider of all time, killing innocents to get more powerful and immersed in the dark side. He has hate and anger, which drive basically everything he does. Palpatine became a better Darksider with practice and time, not because he became a more evil person. He allowed the darkness to fully enter him, which is different. And Star Wars is about teaching children, and really all of us, the keys to being a good person. And this is ultimately why I believe the theory that Anakin killed the younglings to immerse himself in the dark side is incorrect. Doing terrible things to gain higher access to a mythical power isn't something humans can relate to, at least not in the real world. But people can relate to what it's like to feel despair and fear and manipulation and dread, and to have all of that lead into negative situations. The journey of Anakin is meant to be about how anger, fear, and hate are an easy path to evil, how one must remain vigilant against those who would generate these emotions, how love can overpower fear, and how it's never too late to try to be better. Vader and Anakin were not different people. That's the entire point of the saga, and Anakin never intended to transform into Vader, even after he declares himself a Lord of the Sith. His intentions were always at a higher level, to save the person he loves more than anyone in the entire galaxy. So if anything, Revenge of the Sith is a lesson about blind intentionalism, a reminder to address in a healthy way negative emotions, not to hide them and pretend they don't exist like the Jedi Order would, and not to draw on them for evil as the Sith would. Finally, it's a statement against irrational fear and the terrible things even well-intentioned people can do in the wrong circumstances. Anyway, that is all for today. I hope you enjoyed. As always, this has been EckhartsLadder. May the Force be with you.
You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before.